This is the Sunday stream opening song because the other song is copyrighted. La 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 la. Oh look, here comes Dog Cat Fox.
Hi, Sky.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday stream. The stream I do on Sundays because Sunday is the day to stream on Sundays. Hope you're all doing well this morning. This beautiful Sunday morning. It's actually sunny out-ish, or at least it's bright out. I'll take bright over not. But yes, we're back again on Sunday for the Sunday stream. Before I get into my spiel over the topic of today's little episode, who's joining me for this beautiful Sunday morning? Well, I don't know. Who is here? Mike Savage, good morning. Noah Asensio, Old Guy Gamer, Data Wasteland, Miranda Stone, who else here? Dax Orion, he who misses the expanded universe, indeed. Mike R, Derek LaRue, thank you so much, as always, for your continued support and generosity. Appreciate it. I hope today's show lives up to your kindness. Thank you so much. JMK, Jaeger Pony. Who else is here? Did I say? Okay, Mike R and Ryan R. You're of no relation, right? You're just R's. R. Shadowclaw, Gunfox61, Rambler, Liesel7, Advocatus Diaboli, Spoonie the Rebel. Good morning. So, earlier this week, it became official. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have officially put their hat back in the ring for the 2024 presidential election. And this announcement was met with a resounding... You see, here's the thing. 70% of the American people, at least prior to the official announcement, did not think Biden should run again. 70%. Of those 70%, 51% of Democrats didn't think Biden should run again. And of those Democrats in total, there is some not insignificant portion who do not want Kamala Harris to be the vice president in the second time around. And how do we know this? Well, because some of the highest Hollywood political mucky mucks, in an article we covered in a previous stream, were begging for Biden to drop Harris from the ticket. And once you've lost Hollywood, when you're Democrat/liberal, you're not in good shape. But now the Democratic Party, and honestly, the country in general, finds itself in an existential crisis. What do you do when the primary presidential candidate is 80 years old and is an obvious, let's just say for the sake of being polite, physical and mental decline, and along with him has a vice president who to this point has very little enthusiasm behind her even being in the position anymore? What do you do? Well, the Democratic Party is in a really sticky situation because if over half of their members want Biden to not have run, but now he's running, what do? Well, if they don't back Biden fully, if they allow for other candidates to primary him or give any support to candidates that would primary him, well, they're risking fracturing the party even further. And when their biggest fear is a resurgent Donald Trump oncoming for 2024, you can't risk fracturing the party and going against the Trump slayer, Joe Biden. And so beyond that, we as a country have to ask, those of us that are considering voting one way or the other in the next election, do you want to risk putting a man into office who, whatever his qualifications, the realities of time and health are a significant consideration up against who will be replacing him should something go sideways? And so that's kind of what fueled my idea for today's show, is to take a look at, okay, Kamala Harris, as vice president, as a political power player that she has been made into, where is she at? What are her qualifications? Because this next election is, and it needs to be considered, this is something I've said several times, and I'm sure we'll see it in these articles somewhere, needs to be considered as much a presidential candidacy for Kamala Harris as it is an incumbency for Joe Biden. Because if you don't look at this next campaign as a presidential campaign for Kamala Harris, if Kamala Harris is not right there on the stage with Joe Biden, lockstep, and taking part in the campaign as fully or more than Joe Biden, something's wrong. And that's not very comforting. So I've got a couple of articles here. I'm going to try to play this clip from NPR. So what I've done is I found this article or this little podcast thing from NPR that did a review of what she's gotten done during her first year as vice president. So this is a couple of years old now, or at least a year old now. What has she done in her first year? And then I have some other articles looking at where is she at and an actual list of her accomplishments, and not from a source that is adversarial to the Democratic Party or to Kamala Harris. So it's a very kind assessment of her accomplishments. So take a look at that. And so we're going to take a look at what is Kamala Harris bringing to the table. Now, just for baseline note, what are the responsibilities of the vice president, any vice president under the Constitution? Really only has two primary responsibilities. The first one is to break ties in the Senate. So if the Senate has a vote and it's 50-50, the vice president comes in and breaks the tie. The other responsibility is if the president, for whatever reason, is either unable to fulfill his or her duties, then the vice president takes over. That's basically it. Anything beyond that is essentially at the pleasure of the president and or the direction of the president. Although I would love to see like a Big Lebowski type vice president at some point who's just like, I'm vice president now. And the president says, I want you to go to here and here and here and do this, this, and this for the party. And the vice president says, nah, I don't want to. Call me if you need a vote broken or if you need me to take over your spot. I'll be hanging out over here. Because what's the president going to do? Like arrest them? I guess they could drop them. I guess that's the one thing. If you want to keep your job, you got to kind of have to do what the president says. But under the law, they don't have to do anything else. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to try this. I don't think I've tried playing audio off of a web page before. So you guys have to tell me if you can hear this. It's apparently 3 minutes long, and I'll have to pause in between to affirm we're not doing anything untoward to NPR's content. But this is a little interview back and forth on what Kamala Harris has gotten done in her first year as vice president. This is from January of 2022. So let's catch up on what's going on with the vice president.
Asian woman in this job. And Harris also has had...
Wait a second. No, go backwards. No, go back to the beginning. Do I have to do that? Okay, let's try that again.
Tomorrow marks 1 year since Kamala Harris became vice president.
Okay, you guys hear that okay? Let me know in the chat real quick, because I haven't played anything off of a website in a while. 5x5 says JMK, good. But before I get into that, what are you guys saying in the chat? Sorry, I don't want to ignore you entirely. Darren Root, Scribelight, obviously the first thing she's done was babysit an old person. No, that's not her job. He's got far many other managers to do that kind of stuff. That's about it. Let's see. And Old Guy Gamer, she still doesn't have the qualifications to be VP even after being VP for 2 years. There are no qualifications for VP, really. I think unless there's like an age qualification, same as the president. Other than that, no, you can pick whoever he wants. He can pick what was it, Admiral? Was it Admiral Stanton? Was that his name? Ross Perot's vice presidential pick. And it wasn't Stanton. It was something like that. But anyway, best vice presidential debate ever. A guy comes out on stage and says, "Who am I? Why am I here?" I loved his self-awareness. Anyway.
Became vice president.
Yes.
There were a lot of weighty expectations on her. The first woman, not to mention the first Black and Asian woman in this job.
None of those things have anything to do with her capabilities, but go on.
Asian woman in this job. And Harris also has had a very wide-ranging portfolio covering everything from broadband to migration to voting rights. NPR White House correspondent Asma Khalid has been watching the vice president, and she joins us now with more. Hey, Asma.
Hi, Elsa.
So I know that you've been talking with a wide range of people who met with Harris in this first year. Can you just tell us, what did they tell you about how she operates?
How she operates. Well, from that tell-all article I read, last year? or maybe the year before. I can't remember now. Anyway, there was, and I've mentioned this before, and you can look up on my channel if you look under Kamala Harris. There was a ridiculously lengthy tell-all article from CNN, of all places, that profiled the vice president's office as just a place of absolute bedlam. Miscommunication, inefficiency, flared tempers. It just didn't look good. And it was amazing to see that coming out of all places CNN. And I highly recommend, if you're curious about that, because it is really something to read. It is a tell-all book in the middle of a presidential administration. So just look up on my channel. And the link to the article itself is in the video. And so if you don't want to listen to me rambling about it, because when I started reading that article, I didn't think it would go on for like the novella that it turned into.
He operates.
Well, also perhaps the most consistent theme I've heard from people who've met with her is that she's a good listener. You know,
Really? Because how many of she's dumped 2 communications directors in the last 2 years, something like that? Is she really that good a listener? And we just read in a previous stream how she brought on kind of a part-time communications director, so she didn't have to feel beholden to somebody. Thank you, Kieverdam. Sorry I'm late. All 3 of the fundraisers are in chat. Okay, let me replace that. I put up the other. I didn't have the fundraiser for Twisted Skipster's friend up there, but now that's there. By the way, just before I forget, obviously, guys, if you take a look at the top of the chat box to the fundraiser links, thankfully and helpfully provided by Kieverdam for our friends Moonshock, Angry Illinoisian, and for a friend of another viewer of ours, Twisted Skipster. That last one there is to help Twisted Skipster's friend basically pay their electric bill. They find themselves like in dire need of help with paying an electric bill. And I think at this point, they may have already had the electricity turned off. I don't know. But either way, any help you can provide would be greatly appreciated towards that end. So thank you. All right, let's move on.
a good listener. You know, they described meetings that went on longer than they were planned with follow-ups from her staff. Ai-jen Poo is the co-founder of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. She told me she's met with the vice president on 4 different occasions to discuss issues that concern women in the workforce, the care economy, and the fallout from the pandemic.
She was really interested in hearing about the direct experiences of women who frankly have been really invisible to us.
Okay. She's had a lot of meetings and she's a good listener with her guests. All right.
Invisible to other administrations and in general in politics.
Mm-hmm. She says these roundtables don't get a lot of attention, but the VP is inviting people to the White House who historically aren't. And that in and of itself is important. You know, for Ai-jen.
Why? Well, okay. I guess the question is, and I don't know if they'll say this, what resulted from these meetings? Was anything productive done? Was any policy changed? Whatever. Did she refer anything that she learned upwards to the Oval Office? And then it's being considered for something.
It's not just about the policies.
Okay, but let's talk about the policies because
yes.
One of her first assignments was to address the root causes of migration, which is a huge, complicated challenge.
Yes.
How has that assignment gone so far?
Well, immigration advocates feel like this White House is trying to separate 2 problems that just cannot be separated. Immigration at the U.S.-Mexico border, and then the root causes of why people are leaving Central America.
Yeah, that's what never made any sense with her assignment at the beginning. They tried to make this distinction between, she's just going to go on an exploratory mission to just find out the root causes without addressing the actual crisis itself. Like she was just going to be off doing something. It was such a confusing time and such a confusing assignment. And then how long did it take her to actually go to the border, the source of most of our immigration concerns, after she got that assignment? It was February of 2021, I think it was. And how long did it take her to go to the border, will they say?
VP's assignment is technically only the latter one, but last summer she visited El Paso, Texas, and while she was there, she met with Dylan Corbett. He's the executive director of the Hope Border Institute. He told me he's had good communication with the VP staff, and she's taken some important steps, visiting Guatemala and Mexico, meeting with key political leaders, obtaining these concrete commitments from the business community to invest in the region, but he is still frustrated.
Yeah. What's going on in El Paso the last several months? El Paso has been overrun with migrants being shipped there to basically be housed while they're being processed. And this will only become worse after Title 42 passes along in May of this year. I think it's May 11th. El Paso's not having a good time of it. I wonder if they'll talk more about that, or if at this point in time back in 2022, it was as big a problem as it is now.
I did.
It's not enough. We have to overturn the notion that addressing root causes gives us a pass on human rights at the border. And I think that's probably one of the most troubling things that we're going to take away from the first year of this administration.
You told me the situation at the border has actually gotten worse since the VP's visit.
But to be fair, some of the vice president's assignments seem almost politically impossible to.
Yeah, they are politically impossible. And I've said this before, too. Kamala Harris, when she was given that assignment, was being set up to fail. Even an experienced operator in foreign policy or border issues or immigration issues, etc., would have a mammoth task in front of them that was probably not going to be fulfilled in being given that assignment. And yet Biden gave this assignment to somebody who had at that point practically no foreign policy experience, no border experience. In her role as Attorney General of California or whatever, she did have some experience with immigration issues and so on, but not like managing them, solving them, that kind of thing. She was set up to fail. But then what was Biden supposed to do? He just spent the entire campaign, and the Democratic Party had as well, playing her up as this historic figure, this great leader, et cetera, and so forth. He couldn't give her a position or a job or an assignment that immediately put her into the background. He couldn't give her some, know-nothing back of a cocktail napkin kind of job. He had to give her a premier position in something important, something stand out to the country. Except he gave her something that nobody could conquer. You talk about shooting yourself in the foot.
Politically impossible to solve? What do her allies say about that?
It is important to note, Elsa, that the VP wanted to take on some of these challenges.
Well, if she wanted to, if she was part of the process in this, she made a poor decision.
Say, like voting rights, for example. She's had a couple of meetings on the issue with Black women leaders, and Melanie Campbell has been at.
Whoa. No, we were talking about the border crisis. Now you're talking about voting rights? What? Did she just dodge addressing that? And I understand that she's just reporting on this, but still, let me back up a little bit.
To be fair, some of the vice president's assignments seem almost politically impossible to solve.
Oh, some of her assignments. Okay, so that was the segue that let her dodge addressing the border issue anymore. Oh, okay, well, fine.
What do her allies say about that?
It is important to note, Elsa, that the VP wanted to take on some of these challenges. Say, like voting rights, for example. She's had a couple of meetings on the issue with Black women leaders, and Melanie Campbell has been at those meetings. She told me that they gave the VP specific suggestions at their first meeting on how to deal with voting rights access beyond legislation.
Voting rights access. I thought our election system was pristine, pure, had no problems to it, and so on. But okay, again, this is a year-old consideration or whatever. I guess we'll find out as we go forward.
That when people leave prison, they have info on how they can regain access to the ballot if they had lost their right to vote.
Ex-convicts. Okay, well, that's, conceivable, depending on, I think, isn't that a state's issue, or I forget, when it comes to voting rights post-conviction for a felony, is it a state-by-state issue, or is that a federal issue? I honestly can't remember.
And when the group met again in December, Campbell said the VP had some results.
And she put out this, binder and went through some of the recommendations and told us what they had actually done.
Okay.
One of Campbell's
Like what? What did she do? What? She put out this bag and she tells us what she'd done. What?
One of Campbell's frustrations, though, is when she hears this drumbeat about the VP's portfolio. She says that framing that makes it sound like the burden to fix some of these problems is solely Harris's responsibility, when in her view, Harris and Biden are either successful together or not, and she feels that Harris's assignments are tied to the president.
Well, of course they're tied to the president, but if the president is using her as either a mouthpiece or an extension of his own governance, then either she's getting things done and doing a good job in that position, or she's not. And okay, well, thanks NPR. I so very much miss you from Twitter. I guess you ran away from Twitter because Elon was being mean to you or something, I suppose. Real quick in the chat, where'd that go? Fiwise or Fewies? Don't take this wrong, Scribelight. Too late. I'm going to take it the worst way possible, and it's all your fault. No, sorry. But your newscasts are much better than TEDx streams. Those people are just so dumb my brain melts, and melted brains are just not very amenable to entertainment. It all depends on the speaker. All right, it's always a crackerjack surprise. You never know what you're going to get. You might get something boring. You might get something informative. You might get something absolutely bug nuts. Either way, I kind of like the lottery of it personally. But I appreciate that you like my little newscasts, if that's what these are now. I suppose they are. All right. Well, there you go. That was from a year ago. Not very in-depth, not very complete, but we will move on to things that attempt more so. All right, so how many other pop-ups am I going to get here? Any pop-ups? No? Okay. Let me zoom in on a little bit this so I can make sure everybody sees what I'm seeing. All right, here's from Vox, and this is from March 27th of this year. There are valid critiques of Kamala Harris. They also don't tell the full story. What's fair and unfair about the intense scrutiny she's received as vice president? Well, okay. Again, I tried to pick out outlets that are at least classically, politically more kind to Democrats and specifically this White House, so I wasn't looking for any sort of automatic hate mob stuff. Ever since she became vice president, critiques, both fair and unfair, have plagued Kamala Harris. There have been questions about how she's represented the administration as a spokesperson, concerns about staff turnover, yeah, you're not kidding, and most recently, worries about whether she's been effective as VP and what that could mean for her future as a leader of the party. The first wave of criticism featured a number of unnamed Democrats disparaging her and worrying that she wouldn't be able to win an election at the top of the ticket. Well, she didn't win an election at the top of the ticket. Biden did, because Biden was not Trump. And what did everybody play up when she got selected? Very few of her accomplishments, more so than what she is, a woman of color, etc. As a particularly stinging line in a February New York Times piece put it, quote, even some Democrats whom her own advisors referred reporters to for supportive quotes confided privately that they had lost hope in her, unquote. Okay. Such intense scrutiny has been driven, in part, by a heightened focus on Harris as President Joe Biden's successor. Given the president's age and the possibility that Harris may actually have to step into the presidency, there's been a much bigger spotlight on her record than there otherwise might be. Harris's identity, she's the first woman, first Black person, and first South Asian person to hold the VP's office, has also contributed to an unprecedented level of attention relative to her predecessors, historians told Vox. Yeah, and whose fault is that? Who keeps repeating that line over and over and over again? Her supporters. Do they ever bring up? I mean, I covered this in my last stream on Kamala Harris, reading quotes from her own supporters. When they talked about her significance, almost to a one, the first things they brought up were her gender and her race and or ethnicity. They rarely ever mentioned her political history, her work in California. Those things rarely came up, or if they came up at all, they were definitely secondary or tertiary considerations to her significance. Okay. To better understand Harris's performance as vice president and what to make of these critiques, Vox spoke to more than 24 sources, including White House officials, top Democratic strategists, activists, and academic experts. The White House did not respond to a request for comment, and the vice president's office pointed to a public statement from Press Secretary Kirsten Allen, who highlighted what Harris has done so far in a Twitter thread. Sounds good. Remember, this was supposed to be the White House of transparency or something. A tweet cited from Kirsten Allen. As we've seen over the past week, there is no shortage of people willing to anonymously or publicly tear down the vice president. So since no one seems to know what she is doing, know what she has done or is doing, I'll put it all in one place. Okay, well, I've got a list. I've got a list for in a later article. Maybe they'll cover some of it here. The conversations revealed 4 things fueling the criticisms against Harris. First, she's had a few early public missteps and gaffes. A few? How many is a few? Because I tell you, seems like every time she gets on camera for 10 minutes, she's got a couple. Second, there are lingering questions about how she's defined her role as vice president. Is it up to her to define her role, or is it the president? Third, Harris has been held to a higher standard than other VPs, given both her identity and the expectation she may succeed Biden, either imminently or in 2028. Well, yes. And who put her on that higher standard from the get-go? Who was making it historic? Why, with the failure of Hillary Clinton becoming the first female president, I wonder what the drive was in selecting a female vice president. Remember, and I wonder if they'll address this, the first and only important qualification for Biden's vice president was gender. Everything else was a secondary consideration at best. And fourth, some of the criticisms against Harris have overlooked the inherent limitations of the vice presidency. Well, that could be true, depending. In response to her detractors, Harris's supporters note that she's had several big accomplishments, including serving as the administration's lead on reproductive rights, that have been overlooked. I don't think that's been overlooked. I think every time I've heard about Kamala Harris doing anything out on the quote-unquote campaign trail or in public, it's either voting rights or reproductive rights, and not so much about the border anymore. And they raise another issue, that there's an outsized focus on her due to racism and sexism. What was Biden's first criteria for a vice president? What elements of Kamala Harris's makeup did the Democratic Party play up ad nauseum and still does to this moment since her selection? Ultimately, there are valid critiques of Harris that speak directly to how she would lead as president and how responsive a Democratic Party led by her could be. At the same time, the discourse on her record doesn't always capture the full scope of what she's achieved in the role or the nuances of the job itself. Okay, by all means explain. The critiques of Harris briefly explained. Questions about Harris's effectiveness as a spokesperson reached their peak early during a June 2021 interview with NBC News' Lester Holt, when she was repeatedly pressed about going to the southern U.S. border during a visit to Guatemala and offered a confusing response. Quote, "At some point, we are going to the border. We've been to the border, so this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border," Harris said when asked about the issue. At the time, Harris had not yet visited as vice president, prompting Holt to note, "You haven't." Also, are you going to talk about the part where she says, "Well, I haven't been to Europe either"? That was her retort to Lester Holt, saying you haven't been to the border. And she says, "Well, I haven't been to Europe either." Since then, you're not bringing up the Europe thing, really? Okay. Since then, other Harris statements have been pilloried. Pilloried. In October 2022, The Daily Show mocked her as serving up a word salad when discussing climate change or talking about broadband access. Oh, we all know about word salad on TEDx. TED Excellence, pardon me. Harris's stronger rhetorical performances, like an address about the urgent need for police reform at the funeral for Tyree Nichols, which just happened, like 2 months ago? Okay, or a fiery speech that marked the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, haven't received as much attention. because they're not policy decisions or anything. Are you going to bring up the fact that she went down to Tennessee and visited with activist politicians rather than visiting with the victims' families of the recent shooting there? I found that amazing. I found that incredible. Maybe not too incredible, but a little bit incredible. This has helped calcify some Democrats' perception that she's a poor public speaker. She is, demonstrably so over the last 2 years. Quote, it doesn't help that she's not that adept as a communicator, Jacqueline Bedapur, a former head of Georgia's Cobb County Democrats, told the Washington Post in January, for example. Beyond questions about these public appearances, critics claim that they don't know what Harris has done and that she needs to carve out a niche. Quote, she has to find an issue she owns, unquote, a Democratic strategist told The Hill in January. Quote, she's not the Recovery Act person or the COVID person or the voting rights person. She could be the champion of women's rights, but she and her team have been dogged in approaching that. Dogged. Okay. White House officials note that Harris has led both publicly and privately on reproductive rights and voting rights, pointing to the 40 public events she's held on the former and the 60 engagements she's had on the latter. Okay, well, reproductive rights have effectively been sent back to the states. So it's an individual state issue now, not a federal issue, at least at this point in time. So she doesn't have any control over that. She doesn't really have any say in that. The federal government can no longer sort of dictate to the states what they can and cannot do. So her being outspoken on reproductive rights is all well and good, but as a matter of, I don't know, extended presidential power, it's effectively moot. I'm happy to be corrected, but that's my understanding right now. And as far as voting rights is concerned, again, you've got another state-by-state issue. And these things are decided in the courts and by the legislature and by the individual states. What she has to say on it, okay, but all right, well, what is her stance or her speeches or her actions on these two subjects? What have been the results so far? How has she moved the needle one way or the other would be my question. If you're trying to highlight her activities in these areas as accomplishments, you got to, show me the money, more or less. And that she's launched a new effort to address the root causes of migration from Central America. A new effort? Is that new as compared to when she was first assigned it? I don't know. Still, for some, confusion about Harris's contributions seem to be driving disenchantment with her vice presidency. Quote, I think some Democrats are disappointed. Some? Well, at least 51%. There was a lot of excitement around her candidacy. Why? And the historic nature of her candidacy. Yes, why? Over what? And since she's taken office, that excitement has fallen flat, says Carly Cooperman, a Democratic strategist. Please explain why. Vox or whoever. Staff departures and statements from anonymous sources have also fueled long-standing concerns about Harris's management skills. In July 2021, former staffers, including some from her time as California's Attorney General, anonymously complained to Business Insider about what they described as a difficult work environment. And amid a presidential campaign that reportedly had some top-level management issues, Harris's state operations director, cited poor staff treatment as a reason for her decision to resign in late 2019. In June 2021, roughly 6 months after inauguration, a person with direct knowledge of the office told Politico that it was, quote, not a healthy environment and people often feel mistreated, unquote. This included a culture of blame that stemmed from the top, the person said. In December 2021, Chief Spokesperson Simone Sanders and 3 other staffers left their roles. And since then, any personnel changes that have occurred have been put under a microscope. And rightfully so, because as a microcosm of how she might be managing things as president, how she manages her office as vice president is worth considering. The White House has argued that these departures are standard for roles that are fast-paced and susceptible to burnout. Really? Are they going to talk about the two communications directors she's burned through in the last 2 years? Former staffers who immediately transitioned from the campaign to the administration, for example, said that they needed a break from the constant grind or wanted to spend more time with their families. Did you not know what getting involved in high-level politics in Washington was going to require of you? Okay. Multiple former staffers also told Vox that Harris held staffers to a high standard, but was a fair boss. Okay. Harris's office also isn't the only one to have senior staff depart after 1 or 2 years. All right. Now, here's where I'll extend the benefit of the doubt to a certain extent. Okay. I can believe that the philosophy and work ethic of some individuals in the generation supporting Kamala Harris and the Democrats might see what us old timers would think of as a normal business process or professionalism as oppressive. And maybe their tolerance for being told what to do or being expected to act in a professional manner in some way are just outside of their wheelhouse now because of coddling, because of entitlements, who knows? So it's entirely possible that some of the chaos in Kamala Harris's office was a result of a clash of generations. I don't know if that's the case, but I'm willing to at least extend the possibility. So, but unless I'm told something elsewise, it still doesn't look good. Let's see. Harris's office also isn't the only one to have senior staff depart after 1 or 2 years. It's not a matter of if people depart, it's about the frequency and the volume. How does the vice president's office compare to, similar offices or similar vice presidents in the past? The Biden White House overall has seen 8% of senior staff leave in their first year and 32% leave in their second year, according to an analysis by Brookings Institution fellow Catherine Dunn Tenpass, a turnover rate on par with that of President George W. Bush's and President Bill Clinton's. Vice President Mike Pence's team also saw several high-level departures in his first year, including the exodus of his chief counsel, chief of staff, domestic policy advisor, and press secretary. Right, okay, but turnover rate on par? What does that mean? Why aren't you giving us the percentages for those other administrations? Why aren't you giving us a percentage for Kamala Harris's staff versus Pence's staff? That doesn't tell us anything. On par. Kelly Dittmer, a political science professor at Rutgers, said it was vital to hold elected officials and lawmakers accountable for how they treat their staff. Well, certainly. But she added that women, particularly women of color, face outsized attention for issues related to management. Quote, "We see women who are managers in these roles who get scrutiny of treatment of staff and turnover," said Dittmer. That's a fair critique, but are we making the same critique of Mike Pence, of Joe Biden, of anyone else who's holding these roles? Well, I don't know. We're not being given a fair critique in this very article because we're given a percentage of the Biden White House turnover, but then we're not giving comparable percentages of either George W. Bush or President Clinton, or comparing vice president office to vice president office over the course of time. Maybe it's embedded somewhere in this analysis, but why wouldn't they mention it in the article? Thanks so much, Vox. Is Biden's age a problem for the 2024 election? Yes. Roll credits. Yes. The answer is yes. Hayden. Hey, am I the pods from The Fly? I just merged Biden and Harris's names together. Boy, my brain, I tell you what. Harris isn't the first vice president to make public missteps. Oh, you don't say. Are we going to go back to Dan Quayle? Or Joe Biden himself? During his time as vice president, Biden, a self-proclaimed gaffe machine, was constantly making life difficult for his administration. Yeah. It really was a selling point when he became a presidential candidate, wasn't it? She is, however, different from other vice presidents in that she's serving alongside the oldest president ever. Functionally, that doesn't mean anything except for the likelihood she'll have to step in, which is what we're all worried about. Biden will turn 81 this November. Trump was 72 at this point in his presidency. Obama was 49. Biden's advanced age puts pressure on Harris, perhaps more so than any vice president in recent history. There's a real chance she'll need to step into the role of president. Yes. That's led to her being evaluated not just as a vice president, but as a potential president. Yes, but the vice presidency isn't set up to spotlight presidential skills. It's a support role at best. And herein lies the problem. If the Biden administration did not take steps by being pragmatic and saying our president is of an advanced age, oldest president in history to this point, perhaps we should be looking at the vice president as a president in training and spend this at least this first term doing everything we can to make her presidential material. If that has not been taking place, or if those efforts have been inadequate or failing or a failure, that to me is just overall negligence, political negligence for the country. Got nothing to do with party. I'd expect the same thing from a Republican president in the same situation. If they've been ignoring the pragmatic realities of Biden's age and not seeing Harris as a necessary presidential candidate in training, quote, I think it's nearly impossible as a vice president to use the position to your political advantage in a calculated way, says Kate Anderson Brower, a journalist and author of First in Line, a book on the vice presidency. Quote, the most successful modern vice presidents, Dick Cheney and Joe Biden, were devoted to the presidents they served, unquote. It's got nothing to do with devotion. It's got everything to do with being realistic about the situation. The Democratic Party and Joe Biden's White House, if they were going to pick somebody for vice president, if they did not use a lens of who will be an effective president when they did so, and barring that, didn't spend the last 4 years or, almost 4 years training the vice president to become president when necessary, that is a disservice to the country, as far as I'm concerned. It might better serve the president's ego to not have somebody beside him who is literally in the waiting to take over his job, but all the same. Despite the Biden administration's attempts to elevate Harris by referring to the executive branch as the Biden-Harris administration, achievements like the Inflation Reduction Act tend to be solely attributed to Biden. Well, of course, why would he want to share the credit? You don't become president because you have an ego that can allow other people to stand in the room with you. That doesn't mean Harris had nothing to do with those successes, as White House officials repeatedly point out in interviews. Yes, but you have to demonstrate her contributions. Right? You have to show us evidence of her contributions. But of course, her contributions cannot supersede Biden's governing the entire thing or overseeing the process. Because he's the president. He's supposed to be the last, the buck stops here, right? Biden's outgoing Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, for instance, told Vox, quote, when you think about all these legislative pieces that were passed in Congress, excuse me while I cough a second. Better clear my throat off mic than to do it to you. When you think about all these legislative pieces that were passed in Congress, the vice president was part of the conversations with the president, with the cabinet, whether it was the infrastructure bill or the IRA or the CHIPS bill, unquote. There were a lot of people in part of the conversations. What was her role? How did she move the needle? How did she lead on any of these issues that was significant? Now, I understand the vice president's position is kind of I have to defer everything upwards all the time. I get it. But this is a serious question now. Is she ready to govern? Other officials stressed that Harris pushed people internally to consider the full range of response to issues that had no hope of legislative solutions, like the end of Roe. Quote, she's been the one who is always asking the question, have we thought of everything? Are we doing everything we can, running down every policy, unquote. One official said, adding that she was deeply involved in discussions about executive actions on reproductive rights. In what way? Why can you guys not at least specifically? You've got all these leaks. You've got all of these sources. Give us something. I can't dig my teeth into any of this stuff. She was involved in a conversation. Well, I was involved in a conversation over the construction of a cheeseburger the other day, and I had some direct influence on the results of that product. What did Kamala Harris say or do that moved the needle? Outside groups that work on voting rights and reproductive rights offered similar thoughts. Quote, what I don't think she gets enough credit for is all the work she's doing behind the scenes. Don't put it behind the scenes. I'm not saying this as some political loyalist here. I'm being serious. I want to see what the potential president is doing on the issues that she cares about and how she operates. Good, bad, or indifferent, I want to see it. Why is it behind the scenes? And more importantly, why isn't the White House making it in front of the scenes? Whatever that means. Chicago Mike, thank you so much. How often does the president refer to the VP as President Harris? I bet there's a counter out there somewhere. Because it's happened more than once. It is a number greater than 0. Let's put it that way. What she does behind the scenes. And in some ways, that's the role of the VP, says Latasha Brown, a co-founder of Black Voters Matter, who pointed to Harris wielding her influence to make sure voting rights stayed a priority inside the White House and on Capitol Hill. Okay, well, either Kamala Harris herself or the White House, as dictating what does and does not get out to the press or whatever, are doing both Kamala Harris and the Biden campaign a disservice by keeping her work, whatever it is, behind the scenes. There should be cameras. There should be reporters. This should be somewhere as upfront information. But because she is a second in command, doing much of her work, quote, behind the scenes, some of those contributions have been less visible. Do you mean to tell me that doing something behind the scenes is less visible? Wow, thanks, Fox. What? Needing to serve as the tie-breaking vote in the Senate until recently also meant that she's been tied to D.C. and unable to travel more widely. Well, yes, that is one of her primary and one of her only constitutional mandates. So, yes. And what does traveling have to do with anything? I want to know what she's doing here more than I'm necessarily concerned about what she's doing in other countries or other places. Or are they talking about travel domestically as well? Okay, they could mean domestic travel as well. Sorry, I got a little overzealous there for a second. There have been some vice presidents who have stepped out of the traditional support role and taken more obvious control of an issue. Oh, yeah. Vice President Dick Cheney, and he was totally just the vice president for much of George W. Bush's presidency. A former Secretary of Defense, for instance, had so much influence on the war on terror and national security that he was seen as running a shadow government at times. At times? Oh, you mean like for both terms of the Bush presidency? Yeah, okay. For a VP to take on such a prominent position is uncommon, however. Biden was perhaps more typical, serving as a key congressional liaison during the Obama administration. Harris, experts say, is an important envoy on the issue of reproductive rights, including rallying voters ahead of the midterms? Okay. How? To what extent? What impact did her rallying do in getting voter turnout? Why don't you tell us these things? However, that role doesn't give her the sort of concrete legislative victories Biden's work on the Hill gave him during the Obama era, like the passage and implementation of the administration's Recovery Act stimulus package. Well, that's because Harris has no pull on the Hill. Biden had been there forever. So whatever else you might say about him, he knew everybody. He had the connections. He had the relationships established over decades of work on the Hill. Harris, not so much. She doesn't have any pull. She doesn't have any cachet in Washington. She served, which I forget now. Was she a senator or a representative? Oh, God. This is how little I know about Kamala Harris and how important it's been made to me. Either way, her time on the Hill was brief compared to Biden. And so her coming into the vice presidency, what does she bring with her? Well, she couldn't even get her own state to support her in the primary votes, which means that her own state didn't like her all that much. And she blew $40 million of a campaign war chest on nothing. And then she ended up being selected as vice president because she's a woman first and foremost. You want to talk about setting up your vice president to be effectively a lame duck before she even sits in the office? It's one way to do it. Oh, here we go again. As a woman and a woman of color, Harris also faces standards that other vice presidents have not. Are you sure about that? Let me ask you something. If Mike Pence had behaved and performed in the same quality as Kamala Harris has to this point, both within the office of the vice president and publicly, would Mike Pence not be facing serious criticism? Really? Are you sure about that? How can you know that? She's the first one in these demographics. Quote, there were a lot of expectations heaped on her as the first woman, the first black person, the first Asian person in this job, says University of Maryland public policy professor Nyambi Carter. And who did that? The Democratic Party and Joe Biden. What job did Joe Biden give her right out of the gate? The border crisis, or roots of immigration crisis, whichever. Yes, a lot of expectations. Otherwise, what was she to the campaign but window dressing? He had to do something with her. Expectations had to be high. She couldn't just be a pawn. She had to be significant. And who ran that marketing campaign? Those expectations have been evident in the volume of negative stories she's faced, the responses to her gaffes, as well as gendered and racist attacks against her. You don't need to worry about her gender or her race. You just have to look at her performance. If you're looking for something to critique, you don't have to work that hard. Well, not to say that it's working that hard otherwise, but seriously. Republicans, for instance, have repeatedly tried to paint her as the cause of problems along the border, even though she's not singularly responsible for these policies. Well, Biden and Harris did a terrible job of explaining that to the American public. She's just there to look for the root causes. Well, then why is she going down to Guatemala and looking at the populace and saying, do not come to the border? If she's not taking some position of being in charge of the crisis and trying to mitigate the crisis, why is she making declarative statements about what should happen with the crisis? It's not an unfair criticism for poor communication out of the White House and then completely confusing actions on the part of the vice president. Both the attacks and the heightened scrutiny Harris has encountered are classic examples of misogynoir. Misogynoir. That was one of my earliest videos. One of my earliest videos. It was called 50 Shades of Burnt Sienna. I can't believe I remember the title of that. Oh my gosh. Yeah, misogynoir, which is effectively just colorism combined with sexism. That's all that is. A compound form of misogyny and racism that black women face. Well, it's racism within a racial demographic. At least that's how I've understood it. That's how it was explained to me in that video way back when. We're talking about colorism within a particular racial demographic. But in this case, also, I guess, mixed in with some sexism. But okay. Quote, I just can't recall a single story that's been written about her predecessors at the volume and persistent basis that she's seen, said LaFonza Butler, the president of Emily's List and an advisor for Harris's 2019 presidential campaign. I can't recall a single story that's been written about her predecessors at the volume. Are you telling me that Mike Pence received no criticism over his stance on gay marriage? Are you telling me that Mike Pence received no press about his policy about not meeting women alone? Or Mike Pence's complaints or, frictions with Trump? Really? Okay. When it comes to Harris's approach to the role itself, there's a constant catch-22, former staffers say. If she's too vocal and visible, coverage would suggest that she's trying to control the presidency, something her predecessor Cheney was accused of. Okay, well, you know how you manage that? Okay, I'll get to that in a minute. If she's not visible enough, coverage focus on what she's not doing, as is her problem now. If she picked a single policy lane, they say, she'd be perceived as unable to handle issues outside that subject. Well, guess whose fault that is? It's the White House. Again, the pragmatism of the situation should have been forefront on the Democratic Party and the Biden campaign from the get-go. They should have come out and said, Kamala Harris is my partner, and actually operated with her in that role, side by side with him all the way, showing Biden was still at the top, but Harris was right there. right? Harris was right there as the president in training. They could have mitigated all of this miscommunication and what is her role and what is that and the other if they'd been just honest with the American people and honest with themselves about the situation they were constructing. But they haven't been. They've tried to make Joe Biden the singular hero of the entire situation while also pushing aside somebody that they put up as this historic figure because she can't perform or is performing too well or getting more attention than the president, and his ego can't take it, or his handler's sense of his ego can't take it. I don't know what. But instead, now we have this lackadaisical situation of a president that is probably, by all rights, at some point in the near future, going to have a problem that's going to take him out of the running for being president for a while or permanently. And who do you have taking his place? What can the vice president actually do? The fault lies in the buck, and the buck stops at Joe Biden's office. And Joe Biden's office, Joe Biden, has not taken the steps necessary for the situation that he has created and the Democratic Party has created and the voters have created, putting that man into office at the age he is at. That's the problem. Again, Kamala Harris is responsible for what she does, etc. But ultimately, she serves at the pleasure of the president, and her role and her importance to it is at the pleasure of the president. This all is sent up to the president's office, ultimately. Harris's supporters have one constant rebuttal to her critics. Stop treating the vice presidency as something it's not. Quote, I actually think they're kind of funny, said Walsh. Quote, anyone who's being critical of this vice president could be critical of any vice president for what their role is. Yeah, except for any vice president wasn't vice president to an octogenarian. It's a different reality. Modern vice presidents typically follow the approach to the job pioneered by Vice President Walter Mondale, who worked under President Jimmy Carter in the 1970s, according to Joel Goldstein, a law professor at St. Louis University who's written a book on the vice presidency. Goldstein said Mondale created, quote, a vision of the vice president as an across-the-board advisor and troubleshooter, unquote. Yeah, but unfortunately, Kamala Harris doesn't have enough experience to advise Biden on anything, and she doesn't have enough pull in Washington to troubleshoot anything either. But he picked her. Those who've worked in the White House say that's what Harris is for Biden. Really? Quote, I think that the president, in my experience, sort of recognizes the comparative advantages the two of them have. Wait, let me start again. Sort of recognizes the comparative advantages that the two of them have and has in the past sought out and taken to heart the vice president's counsel on a wide range of different issues, says one former White House official. I love that she's had conversations. I love that she's a good listener. What evidence does she have in how she will govern? All we've seen so far is a massive turnover in her office and amazingly disastrous public appearances. I'm sorry. Perception is reality, and the only thing people are perceiving is what's reported explicitly. When you guys tell us that they're having conversations or she's making moves or what, that tells us nothing. Stepping into such a role, however, creates an awkward tension between being vice president and bolstering your own political prospects down the line. There's a reason only 3 former vice presidents have been elected president in modern times, despite more than a few attempts. In some ways, a VP job is the ideal springboard for future political ambitions, given both the experience and exposure. Biden and Vice President Al Gore are among those who've tried to use it in this way. In others, it's a very limiting job because it's a role with little opportunity to tout your own accomplishments. Well, now's the time. Harris does have accomplishments under her belt. Okay? Like launching and overseeing a program known as Central America Forward, which includes helping secure over $4 billion in investment commitments from businesses in hopes of improving living conditions in the Northern Triangle countries and reducing the number of U.S.-bound migrants from the region. Well, apparently that program either has failed miserably or isn't doing what it was meant to, because as I covered in my video, which I just posted the other day, by the way, regarding what I'm calling the Title 42 camps, we're now going to establish border outposts in Guatemala and Colombia, processing centers for our own border in order to try to head off people who might travel from Guatemala and Colombia to the U.S. border as, stopgaps. And there are a lot of problems with that idea in my estimation, but I'll take a look at that video on my channel. She's also been engaging in high-profile diplomacy abroad and has been credited with mobilizing women, voters of color, and young voters over the last 2 cycles. She's been credited with it? Well, I can be credited with, inventing Post-its. But is it necessarily true? Barring any major changes and based on comments Democrats have made at the press, as well as the general perception of her, according to the 538 polling aggregator, her approval rating is at 38% as of March 24th. Wasn't it 39% the last time I looked at that? Those accomplishments seem unlikely to clear the way for her to clinch the presidential nomination unchallenged in the future, however. Wait. That's it? That's it. Launching and overseeing a program. Did she launch it, or is she just the face of it? Was she the driving force behind it? Or is she just the spokesperson? And then mobilizing voting. That's it. Those are the 2 premier things you want to put up there as counterpoints to her approval rating. Okay. Quote, look for the nomination. There's absolutely no way that the ambitious Democrats who ran in 2020, or those who want to run the first time, will stand by and say, well, it's her turn, says University of Virginia political scientist Larry Sabato. She will have to work for it, no question about it. For the nomination? Well, she's not running for the nomination. It's Biden. What? As of now, though, 2 things can be true. Like any public official, Harris can and should be held accountable for her record and how she operates her office. Yes, and that's all that we're seeing. But she's also getting judged more harshly than her predecessors and facing unreasonable expectations that are the limitations of her role preventing her from meeting. Unreasonable expectations. Okay, again, all my expectations are bound within the problem of the president's age. And her performance is singular in that sense. But the White House's negligence, in my opinion, of not more fully preparing her and crafting her into a viable president over this time is their problem and their fault, and also their responsibility. Real quick, go to the chat. Sorry, guys, I got lost in this so much. Ebony Williams, having a massive turnover in her office doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. It all depends on what was going on. Like I said before, if the massive turnover had to do with personality conflicts between, let's just, again, benefit of the doubt, Kamala Harris having perhaps an old school work ethic against a Gen X, Gen Z population in her office that doesn't understand what that means, I would have to at least, give credit to Kamala Harris. But at the same time, we've seen political operator after political operator abandon her. So it's not just 1 or 2 personalities here. She's gone through 2 communications directors, multiple other staff members. Yeah, as a microcosm, as a example of how she might govern the White House, not good, not a good sign. And that's her responsibility. Her profile and her precedence with the president, that's the White House's responsibility. And they've done very little to help her in that way. Advocaz Diablo, she can be held accountable, but we will claim any criticism is just racism and sexism to shut it down. Right. Where do you draw the line between legitimate criticism or something that you're going to classify as racist or sexist? Or just assuming that your only motivation in making a criticism that could be entirely reasonable is because it comes from a place of racism or sexism, right? Once you start delegitimizing people's critiques on an assumption of an ideology, even if there's no evidence in the critique of that ideology, everything goes by the wayside. It really doesn't matter. Anyway, let's move on. What time is it anyway? How long have I been doing this? Oh my gosh, an hour. All right, well, I'll try to speed through these next couple of things. I don't want to go too long. So here we get down to brass tacks, as far as I'm concerned. This might be the last article I read, depending. But I found an article. Excuse me a second. That's one of the pitfalls of talking for a very long time and forgetting how long you're talking. You forget to take a drink of water occasionally. I found an article from HBCU Pulse, or I'm assuming it means Historically Black Colleges and Universities Pulse. This is from March 3rd. And Kamala Harris's accomplishments as the 49th Vice President of the United States. Okay, so we have conceivably friendly outlet that's going to give us a rundown, point by point, fingers crossed, on what should be considered her accomplishments as the vice president leading up to the next election, or whenever she may have to step into the role of president, because that could happen at any time. So let's go through this, shall we? Do I want to read all this first? I just want to get to the list. Give me to the list. Okay. Vice President Kamala Harris's accomplishments thus far. All right. Before I get into that, real quick, as StreamYard attempts to update. Thank you, Chicago Mike. Wasn't Harris involved with NASA where she interviewed a bunch of actors? Oops, I mean kids. That sounds vaguely familiar about something, but I have a memory of this. It's not so forefront in my mind that I can remember the details, but I believe you might be correct about something. That was my politician's answer in affirming your comment, because I don't remember. But maybe it'll be listed on here. Maybe they'll cite that as an accomplishment. All right, this is a pretty lengthy list. All right, let's go. Number 1. 2 of the key responsibilities of the vice president are to preside over the Senate and break ties as needed in Senate voting. Yes. Vice President Harris has broken 29 ties in the Senate, 3 in 2023, the most in modern history. Only Vice Presidents John C. Calhoun and John Adams broke more. Okay, and let me guess. Every time that she did so, she voted on the Democratic side of the question. Okay. Note, presiding over the Senate, breaking ties as needed in the Senate, and serving as president if the sitting president is removed or incapacitated are the only constitutional roles of the vice president of the United States. Yes. So, again, everything else about her situation, everything else about her profile, everything else about her being prepared to possibly take over the presidency falls to the discretion of the Oval Office. Okay. All right, here we go into the real stuff. Vice President Harris has been able to successfully confirm all the nominees that President Joe Biden has appointed, which is key to the administration being able to effectively do the work needed to advance their agenda. Successfully. How? Like, did she twist elbows? Did she, leverage some political capital? Successfully confirm? That's just another vote. And she didn't do it by herself. Okay, Vice President Harris serves as the Biden administration's main representative for diplomatic relations abroad. Well, not at the time that she was interviewed by Lester Holt. She hadn't even been to Europe at that point. Vice President Harris is the first U.S. official to visit Palawan, a province of the Philippines. That's her biggest foreign policy accomplishment abroad as of March 3rd of this year. Okay, Vice President Harris has advocated for increased HBCU funding as an alumna of Howard University, pushing the Biden administration to allocate billions of dollars in funding to HBCUs, continuing her support of HBCUs that she showed previously as a U.S. Senator. Well, were billions allocated to HBCUs or not? Pushing Biden to do so is different than actually making it happen. And I understand she can't make it happen, but did her efforts result in any tangible results? Doesn't say. I'm assuming not to this point. Vice President is, by the way, this is probably really small on the screen, isn't it? Sorry, I apologize. Let me boost that up a little bit. Is that a bit clearer? That's a bit clearer. Okay. Let's try that again. Right. Okay. Vice President Harris was instrumental in the passage of the American Rescue Plan, which included a $2 trillion COVID relief stimulus bill that had previously been stalled by Senate Republicans. How was she instrumental? How? Like, what actions did she take? Who did she bring over to the side in the voting? What leverage did she exert on the situation? I love all these amorphous, vague terminologies being used here, but I want to know, what did she do? And even if something isn't successful, I'm not so much concerned about success. I'm just concerned about what was the result and what were her actions in achieving that result, success or failure. I don't necessarily fault one politician, vice president or otherwise, for something not going through, because it takes two to tango most of the time. But what did she do? How did she demonstrate her abilities in politics, in governance? What? Vice President Harris has been a champion of maternal health and has toured the country advocating for a woman's right to choose amid the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade in the summer of 2022. Fine. Anybody can do that. That's fine. But again, as far as I understand it, the whole situation has devolved now to the states individually, and she's only going to have pull in those states where they're democratically friendly. So what? Vice President Harris has been an effective leader in criminal justice reform. Has she? Does California think so? Is that why they didn't back her up during the primaries? And has championed the need for continued investment in early childhood education. Well, I mean, if you're talking about a school to prison pipeline kind of thing, I guess those two things could be related, but what? How has she been an effective leader? How? As vice president, how has she been an effective leader? What reforms has she championed, and what were the results? Vice President Harris has been an outspoken advocate for women's rights and STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. Yeah, she's done a lot of talking. Great. Is that an accomplishment? I mean, I could be outspoken about STEM. Would I be able to mark that off as an accomplishment just for stating my opinion? Well, I'll tell you what, everybody, my entire YouTube channel is an accomplishment. Actually, it is an accomplishment. It's actually, I did something and it resulted in a thing. And I, produced stuff and edited things and created stuff and made, overlays and art and but I mean, having an opinion and saying it, that's an accomplishment. Okay. All right. Vice President Harris is a strong advocate for the middle class and has been an outspoken critic of President Trump's policies that benefit the wealthy and hurt the working class. It's okay, whatever. Vice President Harris has been outspoken. Okay. Here's a quick preview. What's going to be today's secret word to join the Discord? Vice President Harris has been outspoken in her support for the Affordable Care Act and has worked to build up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. How? Additionally, Harris has spearheaded initiatives such as the Justice is Coming Home campaign, which aim to improve access to mental health services for veterans. Okay, well, oh my gosh, something specific. All right, how has that done so far? Additionally, Harris has proposed new legislation that would make it easier for people to sue financial institutions and big businesses. Okay. Do you want to give us the name of that legislation? Okay. All right. I'll give you this. An actual named initiative with an actual goal. And she spearheaded that. All right. I'll stipulate she is the front runner, the head of the pack on that one. Good. I'll call that an accomplishment. Making any effort in government to help our veterans, you get a smiley face from me, at least for the effort. I'd love to see the results and hear about them. Vice President Harris has been a vocal support. Okay. Advocate, outspoken, vocal supporter. A vocal supporter of voting rights, using her platform as vice president to call for the passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. I'm assuming those acts are still mired in the legislature. All right, she's called for the passage. All right. As the vice president, Harris is responsible for overseeing many of the more important aspects of the U.S. government, such as healthcare, immigration, and education. No, she breaks ties in the Senate and replaces the president if he becomes incapacitated. Unless you're going to say that presiding over the Senate thus makes her responsible for overseeing anything as far as a vote that comes to the Senate. Is that how you're? Please don't tell me that's what you're doing here, because that's the only conclusion I can come to. She has championed progressive policies. Has she been outspoken about progressive policies? Has she advocated for progressive policies? Has she been a vocal supporter of progressive policies? Okay, she's championed progressive policies, such as expanding healthcare coverage to millions of Americans and increasing the minimum wage. Okay, Vice President Harris has helped to increase diversity in government by appointing more women and people of color to key positions. Okay, great. I'll just HBCU. I get banks and colleges mixed up. HBCU, please refer to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and tell me, is that really something that we should be celebrating all by its lonesome? Vice President Harris has been a vocal advocate. Oh, well, vocal supporter, now a vocal advocate. Is she also going to be a vocal champion and vocally outspoken? Vice President Harris has been a vocal advocate for criminal justice reform, which she believes is key to reducing the number of people in prison and improving rehabilitation programs. She has also worked to reduce gun violence. How? Including through her work on the bipartisan assault weapons ban and expanding background checks. How? What relationships has she leveraged? What strings has she pulled? She's vice president. She's not a legislator. She does not have any power over anything in this situation. But you're calling this an accomplishment. How is that an accomplishment? What was accomplished? Her positions, her opinions, her statements, all on their lonesome, absent anything actually coming about from them, are not accomplishments. Vice President Harris has championed environmental causes such as increasing renewable energy production and combating climate change. She has also worked to improve infrastructure, such as increasing funding for transportation and developing a plan to combat climate change. She increased funding for transportation. She did? How? When? By what method? Vice President Harris has worked to promote economic justice by advocating for policies that help low-income Americans access affordable health care, housing, and education. She also believes that debt-free college is a key part of improving the economy for all Americans. Vice President Harris has helped to address the southern border crisis. Wait a second. Quotation marks? Quotation marks. Okay, author of this article, please do take a visit down to El Paso sometime. Talk to the mayor of El Paso and ask him whether or not the word crisis should be in quotation marks in regards to the situation down there. Okay, tell me about how many people have suffocated to death or almost to death in tractor trailers along the southern border in the last 3 years alone. And I'm not setting aside what happened during the Trump administration. I'm talking about the border absent a presidential involvement. I'm just talking about the conditions down there and the situation down there for years now. You're going to put crisis in quotation marks. Okay, I mean, if everything above this point in the list didn't already give me that clue, you're not being a serious journalist here, or even a serious critic of what's going on. Vice President Harris has helped to address the southern border crisis which had seen a surge in the number of immigrants from Mexico and Central America seeking unauthorized entry to the country. Yeah, what numbers are there? Right now, that's not Kamala Harris's fault, but it sure as heck was basically her responsibility, turned into it or otherwise. So, aside from one thing on this list that stood out to me as, okay, you got a veterans initiative going. Absent any other information, I'll just stipulate for the sake of argument that she was the person who spearheaded that initiative. Good, great. Do more of that. What else? Everything else. She has an opinion. She's said things. And again, this is the fault of the White House. There's only so much critique that can be levied at Kamala Harris's doorstep for quote unquote getting things done. But this is just reflective of how negligent the Oval Office has been in propping her up over these last couple of years into being a viable presidential replacement. And this is the peril that we face as a country, whether between now and the election or after the election. If Biden wins again, we've got another 4 years plus the year between now and the election, right? So 5 years conceivably that we have to wait with bated breath day by day. Is Kamala Harris going to become the president of the United States? And what is the Biden White House doing to prepare for that possibility? I was about to say eventuality, but you never know. And seemingly nothing, because we're almost done with their first term, and this is the best her most accommodating supporters can give us. And as much as this is a reflection of Kamala Harris's performance, again, it is also an indictment, as far as I'm concerned, of the malfeasance and malpractice of the White House in preparing for the inevitable. Not a good sign to me for this ticket. Not a good sign. But, you know, full disclosure, I didn't vote for Trump. I didn't vote for Hillary. I didn't vote for Biden, and I didn't vote for Trump again. I have abstained from the last 2 presidential elections because I did not have confidence in either of the main candidates being put up as wanting them in the White House. So on this issue, I'm kind of looking at it as pragmatically as I can. If Joe Biden becomes president again, or if any time between now and whenever Joe Biden is out of office, something goes sideways, everybody has to be concerned about whether or not Kamala Harris is up to the task. So in this upcoming election, if the White House, if the media at large, especially and most especially on the left-leaning media, if they are not looking at this and scrutinizing this campaign as a Kamala Harris presidential campaign in tandem to Biden, as far as I'm concerned, they're doing a disservice to the country. I know that sounds overdramatic and hyperbolic, but I don't think I'm too far off the mark there. The scrutiny that they're complaining about is necessary in this situation. And the situation has been created entirely by the Biden White House. So, and Kamala Harris, like I say, for as many critiques as I have of her, she has been put into an impossible position. She has been. She was raised up into near deity status by her own party on the basis more for what she is than what she's done. And then given responsibilities that would frustrate even the most experienced and professional operator in politics. And lo and behold, she wasn't able to achieve those goals. Is that her fault? Well, it was her responsibility, and purportedly from the previous article, she lobbied to get those responsibilities. So anyway, I think I'm going to about draw things to a close here, but I'll take a few minutes here for you guys. I had one other article. It's from the New York Times, and the title is, "With Biden's 2024 bid, Kamala Harris will be under more scrutiny." I'm not going to go into that one right now. Maybe I'll do a follow-up later. I want to try to keep this to an hour and a half at the most. Link to that article is in the description below if you'd like to take a look at it yourself. But I might save it for another time. Let's see, who else is here? Woodcutter, oldest profession, old school work ethic. Oh, no. Payar D. Bayar, she ain't no Keanu Reeves. Oh, man, can you imagine Vice President Keanu Reeves? Wouldn't that be great? Oh, man. Super Koopa TV, just saw California is going to ban diesel trucks completely by 2042. Any thoughts, Scribe? Good luck. How are you going to move those giant engines efficiently? Electric? Yeah, take a look at what electric motors can haul versus your average diesel truck. But okay, I mean, they've got 20 some odd years to probably reverse themselves. Yeah, talk about supply line issues. As soon as you hit the border of California, this truck cannot pass. What you're gonna offload your cargo into what? 17 electric trucks at triple the cost. Those are my thoughts. I am a vocal advocate of giving my thoughts. Renovatio, she did that to herself. She's not the victim of the party. All of them are a part of the same women's superior echo chamber. Her gender's got nothing to do with it. If a male vice presidential candidate was brought into the same situation with the same background and given the same responsibilities, they too would be floundering, and they would as well be rightly criticized for it, even though most of the criticism should be aimed at Joe Biden specifically because he gave her the assignment. He set her up to fail. It's got nothing to do with her gender. I know. Even though everybody's telling me, oh, she's this, that, and the other, I couldn't give a rip less about her gender or her skin color. Is she doing the job? Those things are not qualifiers. That was supposed to be the whole point of what we've been doing in this country, in our society, since 1964 specifically. But whatever. Let's see. Anything else before I wrap it up, as it were? Jamie Jam, but Scribe, she should have the power because she's a woman. Well, she does. She does specifically and explicitly because she's a woman. That's why she has the power. Biden told us so. He was going to pick a female vice president. That was the powerful element. You know, a breath away or heartbeat away from the presidency was determined by gender by the president. But anyway, Ebony Williams, no, she's not doing a good job. Within the boundaries of her office, within the boundaries of her own position, no. As far as her requirements under the Constitution, she's doing exactly what she was supposed to do. She's broken ties in the Senate and overseeing the Senate, and she is the lady in waiting, to put a phrase on it, in case the president needs to be taken over for her. But everything beyond that is at the pleasure of, or at the leeway to, the president himself. And within that confine, no, she hasn't done a good job. She hasn't managed her office in anything that would be considered a reasonable way or an admirable way. She's had too much turnover. Even if the turnover, if witnessed by people in a objective way, could be saying that, oh, well, she wasn't in the wrong, it still shows that either she has really bad taste in who she's choosing for her office, or she has a personality that can't be gotten along with political professionals over and over and over again. Not a good sign. How she's handled herself in media interviews, that's on her. That's not Joe Biden's fault. Even if she's being asked questions or if there's an air of expectation over her power or her position, whatever she says to a reporter is what she's saying to a reporter. When she makes a speech, she's making the speech. And these are the only pieces of evidence we have as the public to estimate her qualifications and her tenacity politically and in governance. And if she's doing all this amazing stuff behind the scenes, I tell you what, Joe Biden didn't ask me, but I will advise Joe Biden right now. You need to bring her on the scene, not behind the scene, on the scene. From now through to election day, she has to be a visible, active, and significant part of your governance. She has to be. Anything else is, like I say, is just a disservice to the country, is negligence, in my opinion. And, you know, I don't know. I could repeat myself, but I think I've done so already a couple of times. Anyway, everybody, I'm going to try to draw it closed here. By the way, I have a Discord. If you're not already a member of the Discord, well, you can become a member right now, and at least for the next day, with the link I'm about to put into the chat box. So if you click on that link, you'll find yourself on the Say Hello landing channel. Excuse me. And all you have to do is say the secret word. Because if you say the secret word, that tells me and my moderators that you actually watch the show. And if you watch the show, well, you can become a member of the Discord. And the secret word today is outspoken. Yes, outspoken, which is the key term to describe nearly every single one of Kamala Harris's quote unquote accomplishments in her time as vice president. Unlike the quote unquote crisis at the border. That really irritates me. I gotta tell you, for as much time as I've spent covering what's going on at the border, for anybody to put crisis in quotation marks like it's a maybe or just a thing that they call it, oh, that really burns me. Miranda Stone, thank you so much for your generosity and all your help as moderator, both of the show and of the Discord server, as I find my words. Thank you so much, Miranda. Hope you're having a good day. Everybody, thank you so much for joining me. If you'd like to hear more from me by any chance, well, I have a whole channel full of stuff. And also take a look at my video I just posted, not a live stream, an actual video regarding the Title 42 camps that are being established in Guatemala and Colombia. I think those should be a bigger story than they are, seemingly. But there you go. I cover at least one sizable story on the subject. And besides that, I'm here every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for TED Excellence, where I take a look at off-brand TED Talks for education and enjoyment, or oftentimes mind-melting pablum. It all depends on what we get, because life is like a box of chocolates. And aside from that, of course, I'll be here next Sunday for the Sunday stream. Everyone, hope you have a good rest of your Sunday. Hope you have a good rest of your weekend. Hope you have a good week ahead of you. I hope you are all safe and well. If you are not well, please get well soon, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.